A warm welcome to all our viewers to our series Meaning of Life. What does our voice reveal about us? The neuroscientist Josua Kohberg explains the background to our voice. Stay tuned. Hello Josua, welcome. Thank you. Hello Rolf. Our voice, is that an indicator of our current state of mind? Once like this, once like that, or does our voice reveal something fundamental about us, about our personality, about our character? Whatever else can or could be read further from it? Well, actually the voice is very, very fundamental. You can see the image of the voice. We found a way to visualize that, to get a deep look at a person's character. And actually the goal is not that someone else is looking at it, but that the one who owns a voice has that look at their character. It's actually the main idea behind it, to recognize yourself. But you can recognize mood swings in the sense of, for example, upsets when someone has temporary stress, when someone suffered trauma. Such things can actually be determined via the image of the voice. So that means, on the one hand, basic things, on the other hand, nuances in mood. Can it happen that the mood, whether it's extremely positive or extremely negative, maybe obscure basic things? Absolutely. So I'd like to give a sad example. When a person is massively upset by external influences, for example, I suffered from blood poisoning in 2015, so I had an injury to my foot. This led to blood poisoning, which in turn led to 4 emergency surgeries, 10 days of multiple organ failure, with a risk because the antibiotics haven't worked. And there it was really the case that my voice really didn't say anything anymore apart from absolute chaos. Because of course I was physically, mentally and emotionally in an extremely exceptional situation. That is, in such situations, the vocal image is actually no longer verifiable. So when drugs are administered, when there is pain, when there is fear of death or things like that, then it becomes really difficult. And how is that done? How do I get such a voice print? Am I looking at certain frequencies or speeds, or how does it work? Exactly. So that's actually a pretty simple principle. It's a bit maths intensive, but the idea behind it is quite simple. So my wife and I, we've been exploring this for, I think 17, 18 years now. And we've had a colleague from Austria with us for a few years now, with whom we developed today's voice standard. And you have to imagine it like this. You're recording a human voice, so it's not about what the person's saying, you just record the voice and measure it. How many strikes of G, A, C and C sharp are contained in this vocal picture? And from this, I can show this very briefly. You then get a graphic representation. So that means we have developed an imaging process to graphically depict the voice. Today, of course, there's an app in front of it, so it's technically very demanding, to put it that way. But in fact, the picture that emerges is really a vocal picture. A bit higher? Oh, okay, so you can see it on the camera. Yeah, so exactly. So there are also excerpts from the book. We've written a really exciting basic work on this. The book is called Unison because the objective would be to have that one sound positioned in the middle of the character, that you strengthen it, the so-called bass tone. And you can see it very nicely here. Well, in the middle of a voice I always have the so-called bass tone, around which everything in my character revolves. And then I have so-called secondary tones. So the first strongest, the second strongest, third, fourth strongest secondary tones, and these tones influence me. Just just as an example, if I have a creative person, so the bass tone of the person is a very creative tone, and I have a structured tone right next to it as the first tone, then I have a creative person who works in a very structured way. For example, if I have the same bass tone but have a second creative tone next to it, then I have a doubly, trebly creative person who's then much more creative than the first. So, just to give a few examples of what you can get out of such an imaging form. Simone, my wife, always calls it an imaging procedure. Indeed it is. And then I have so-called alternating tones on the side, for example, which now indicate, for example, physical stress, mental stress. So you can really read a great deal from the voice and actually get a picture of your own personality. You just mentioned to read out stress, for example. I don't hear the voice, I only see the picture. Does it need a base image as a reference? I mean, in a normal non-stress state, so that I can compare? Or can I say that absolutely, directly on such a picture? Exactly, it really is absolute. This is the current image of your mood, your voice, your personality. We recommend, for example, before you carry out such a measurement or such an analysis, that you do that, for example, after getting up an hour later. You shouldn't do any kind of extreme sport beforehand, so everything that can lead you into a changed mood should simply be left alone during this hour, not drinking coffee, etc. And then you make this recording of your own voice. The whole thing takes about 15 minutes, and after that you have such a voice picture available. And the interesting thing is, if I were very out of tune now, for example, because I'm under stress at work, or because I'm ill, or because I have existential fears, whatever, then the software would also show me that, and we would then have the opportunity to carry out a so-called mood coaching, so that I spent 8 weeks and can consciously train that my voice is cleaned, and I can then really determine my bass tone. But I don't clean the voice by working directly on the voice, like singing a scale or whatever. I'm saying this a bit naively. So I work on myself. I try to work my way towards the cause, and the voice then shows whether I've been successful with this process. No, it's actually more like the first thing you just said. We don't work with a scale or anything now, but we take, for example, let's say a person now with this voice image. We would be out of tune and we could now say this is the bass tone. Then the person would work with that bass tone. So that's an exercise that you ideally do once a day, 10 minutes. You have to sound it, and this is actually a mantra that you may have heard from India before, such an om, that's such a certain tone. So it's not about consciously thinking, now, why am I upset? You often know. Maybe you know that you have stress at work, in relationships, that you have money problems, whatever. It's actually just a matter of getting the system back into sound. And if I have a very out-of-tune voice, then we have a very special tone. The tone is functional for all people. And that basically promotes the harmony of your own tone, so that after 8 weeks you normally have a relatively clean voice. The voice, I'd like to dwell on that a bit with the vocal image. I do these exercises, I get a cleaner voice. Does that affect my psyche, my mood? Because I enjoy the exercise, or what? Where is the benefit of this mantra singing, or these voice exercises? How does it work? Well, the real benefit is that we are a very sensitive system. On the one hand, we have the body with which I'm now sitting here, or with which you're sitting there, but then there's also a spiritual part and a mental part. And in this model, which we are based on with voice, we are talking about a harmony of body, mind and soul. So that means this mantra that we're using using here with the one tone. That's the focus of your character. You raise the unison. So the vibration of body, mind and soul is aligned to a sound. And you actually say it like that. A person who is at peace is in harmony with themselves. And if we dissect the word unison, then it's actually the case for each of us, no matter what tone we have. Well, when I look at the voice, each of us has a dominant tone, a sound, and all other tones, all other sounds subordinate themselves to this one sound. If I'm out of tune now, for example, I have tones that are of the same pitch. I have tones that exceed my bass tone. And with that, for example, I have confusion, I have fears, I have physical problems. And this exercise, it's non-verbal. So I don't do any conscious coaching and think about what should I do now to make myself feel better. It doesn't matter at all. I can just leave everything as it is and sound 10 to 12 minutes a day. And out of this mantra comes harmony. And my system regulates itself, body, mind and soul. And of course, we put it on a very sound scientific footing. I'll give you an example. We thought, okay, what kind of people are out of tune? And there is a huge target group. In Germany, 80% of all employees have sleep disorders. Then we took 120 people with the University of Mainz. They had to meet certain requirements, so they had to have insomnia for at least 6 months, already suffer from it, already have physical problems. There was quite a requirement to be allowed to participate in the study. Then we determined the bass tone, and in fact almost all participants were out of tune. Then, for 8 weeks, they completed a training session focused on this sound. And within those 8 weeks, sleep disturbances have reduced by over 60%. Chronic stress, over 30%. We've also written everything here in the book as a study, because the point was that they carried on with everything else. They worked, they lived with their families. Well, they didn't go to a cure for 8 weeks where they got out of their rhythm of life, and then they were able to achieve this result. And that's fascinating because the harmony actually ensures that everything else is subordinate. So that means my body comes into centering, my soul comes into centering, and my spirit. And that suddenly calms me down. My entire system is centered. The Asians say I come in the middle, or I'm in the middle. Exactly. So that can also be used diagnostically, if I understand it correctly. Exactly. We have a lot of doctors who work with it, including university hospitals like Mainz, for example. In Frankfurt, for example, we have pain patients who work with it. So that actually applies to very, very many areas because it actually works everywhere where people are out of tune. And that's unfortunately almost everywhere. I also want to pick up on a question I asked a little earlier. I ask it differently. If I happen to record someone somewhere with a microphone and I visualize that, first recording of this person, can I say, are they out of tune or not? Or do I need reference values from this person? I see what you mean. So it would not work that I just record you, but it would require a certain amount of preparation. So normally it's like this. The user is led through this out bias. You actually first relax for 15 minutes. For that, we have natural sounds. You can hear the sound of the sea, or better yet, if you can go out, take a walk in the woods, then do it. And when you're at rest, you shouldn't listen to anyone else either. You shouldn't speak yourself. So really center yourself. Only then does the analysis of the voice make sense, because then we have a reference value in the relaxation. You should then also talk about things that make you feel positive. For example, don't talk about the fact that you have a toothache, or something like that, but you'd talk about something nice, what you experienced on vacation, what makes you happy at work. The only requirement is positive feelings about it. And you say your first name, your last name, things like that. But that's only the requirement. And what you say is actually irrelevant. Then really only the corresponding strikes are taken from what you speak. So that's a calibration phase that precedes, and the more conscientiously I do this, the better the statements are afterwards for the results. Exactly. That just comes to mind. There are institutes that can be reached by phone, for example. Telephone companies or even banks have started to verify through a voice print that I'm actually the person calling. What does that mean when I look at these pictures now? For me, they have a relatively rough resolution at first glance. And nevertheless, are these voice prints used like a fingerprint or iris print? So a biometric feature to identify someone. Is it really 100% reliable? Absolutely. Well, there actually is. It really is. We also wrote that in the book. The voice is like a fingerprint. So your voice in your constellation, there is no second one on this planet, neither of mine or those of every viewer. You have to imagine it like this. Basically, we have 12 tones. I'll be happy to show you again. For one, we have 12 tones. Just this constellation, the composition of the 12 tones, that's where we come up to, I believe, 2.5 or 3 billion possible constellations. But it gets even more interesting. Now, the question remains, to what extent is the potential lived out? And that means you can see here, for example, in the voice picture, the bass tone here is G sharp. It's lived out to, let's say, 2/3, and then there's a lack of potential up here. Lived out. What does lived out mean? This person lives their character strength to about 2/3. So there's still real potential that could be developed. And this can also be measured in the voice. That means we have an infinite number of possible combinations, so that we can also say that we have several 10,000 analyses. And there are none the same, so there are no identical vocal images. We can definitely say that from our experience. And what also plays a role now, for example, with banks or something like that, if you mention it, is that what we don't measure at all. So we only measure the number of strikes. But of course you can still take the intonation now, the sound pressure, so how loudly, how softly does someone speak. So it's really the case that the voice works as a biometric signal, like a fingerprint, definitely. That means my voice is digitized by procedure, so it can be saved in the database, can be used as an identifier. Exactly, although we don't do that, I have to say that now. In fact, we only take this proportion of the voice, so the number of strikes. This is a mathematical process that takes place on the user's smartphone, and only rows of numbers are really transmitted. It's not conveyed what they speak, how they speak. None of that interests us. We just take the rows of numbers, transfer them to the back end, and then provide the user with a voice image, so that they can recognize themselves in their character. And also where there is potential for improvement or potential for healing, especially if you are in a bad mood, because somewhere dominant is recognizable. Yeah, the whole thing interests me from the technical side, also in the context of digitization. It is precisely with identification that misuse can also be practiced. Now, I'm convinced that a computer could also fake such a voice print and impersonate someone. Of course, you would have to know first who is that, and there it can be like with the finger, when fingerprints on smartphones could still be faked in the early days. There are always some options. I can also probably match people, let's say dating or bringing business partners together where common vibrations exist, or maybe opposite ones, to complement each other. So there you're free. Absolutely. In another show we spoke about coaching and said we have the ability to bring people together to form a team. So you probably use that for coaching as well. Yeah, exactly. So we're using this purely as an analysis tool. Also in teams, in companies, also in relationships. So partners, do they match? Where are the problems? This is an incredibly sensitive tool because you can just recognize yourself in the first step, and then of course you can reflect on it. With whom, for example, can you work very well with? Who compliments you? For example, who would map your weaknesses to their strengths? Well, there really is an incredibly high exciting approach in business, which we're already implementing very, very successfully. And if you create it that way, you can also make recommendations then, or so, like, from astrology, for example, it comes to mind, to create character analyses. So is that also verbalized then? Yeah, exactly. So when someone carries out such an analysis of their voice, and the first step is they get their bass tone. They get an overview of 20 of their most important characteristics. That would be free. If they then say, okay, that interests me, then they can order a complete analysis between 40 and 45 pages, and it will be fully displayed. This is a wonderful basis when someone says they would like to work on their personal development, would like to see how to develop their character further. Then this analysis is incredibly powerful. There are also over 800 variables in it. That is, if you have a structured human, then there is a structured, as I briefly said before, with a creative part on the side or something, then there is, for example, someone who is structured fourfold or resilient fivefold, then the person suddenly understands why they work the way they work. Incredibly fascinating subject. And then I can align my personal ideals about how I would like to develop further. We always have people who really sit there with tears in their eyes and say it's actually unbelievable that they are described in such detail, because they have felt for many years that this is the case, but you can't verbalize it, and then suddenly you read it like in a mirror. So this is really a very fascinating topic. And at the same time, you also provide the therapy, or the therapy approach, how to harmonize the voice with the voice, how to face a state that one does not like. Exactly, and it's completely non-verbal. Well, we're not delivering conscious coaching or anything like that, but we're saying train with your own voice and do some back coupling. That is, if you train with your voice, without you consciously thinking anything, without thinking about anything, then that has a backwards coupling to your entire situation. That means you come into harmony. From the harmony, you can, of course, consciously think again. I'd like to have a change here, I'd like to have an improvement here, and it will work much better because you don't somehow project the next chaos into your chaos now, but you tidy up. And into what is tidy, you then go with approaches to change. How does that work, for example, with people who need their voice extensively for their job? For example, singers, or extreme example, opera singers, who do such an amazing workout every day. Is that still representative? It's a very exciting question. We actually have 3 or 4 opera singers with us now, because these people naturally reflect very quickly when they hear or read anything on the subject of voice. Then they are extremely open. And the big difference is that we're picking up the speaking voice here. So we don't take the frequencies of the singing voice. Because actually we did this test with one of these singers. He can even change his voice while speaking. He then did it. We did 4 or 5 analyses with him, and we have an 80% hit rate. Despite the disguised voice, we always got the same result. If he were to sing something, then we actually had completely different voices, because that's something he's trained and learned for decades. But the speaking voice is still representative. There are people who consciously disguise their voice. So if I were to talk now like a Mickey Mouse or something, and of course I wouldn't get a representative measurement out of it. I can do that, I can create that. But that wouldn't interest anyone. Yeah, so the speaking voice, that's the normal voice, and probably if I talk a lot, I can probably change it for a short while. Now, if I just want to deceive a system, an identification system, for example, but sooner or later, it comes out. I fall back into my basic pattern. And what we can also tell from all these measurements that we've made, for example, if you have a normal daily routine, so you drive by car to the office or by train, then you work 8 hours and then you go home again. And hear a lot, talk to colleagues, you're always out of tune in the evenings. So when you do an analysis in the evening after an all day at work, you're actually out of tune. And what we actually want to do with this concept now is that you find out in peace what is the tone, your harmony. And then there are different ways to train consciously or unconsciously during the day. With the news, for example, you can always play your tone and stay in the mood. And that's fascinating because it doesn't matter if you then work or drive or whatever you're doing, what kind of stay in your, you sort of kind of stay in your harmony and therefore more efficient, healthier, more balanced. So this is really a huge advantage that can be put to good use in our way of Western life. Great. And can I also buy it for myself, for example, or is it only available as a service via the app, or how does it work? Well, you have to use the app because the app is basically the technical platform. So that means you do it via the app. You simply create the analysis first. So you speak, so you're being carried through the app, like I said, 15 to 20 minutes. After that, you get your bass tone and your first 20 hero traits. And then you can just think about whether that appeals to you. And if you are interested in continuing, then you can get an analysis. We even have individual coaching offers afterwards. So there's a whole range of options that you can work with. So that's like the introduction and the background or the follow-up services that could also be obtained from you. So it's no use if I somehow buy it now and just analyze and analyze. At some point I did the analysis and then it's about recognizing the consequences if they are necessary at all. Maybe it's not necessary or I'm perfectly content with my life. So, an interesting thing. Well, if I want to investigate that a bit now, if I want to do a voice analysis like this, where can I find out more about this? We have a website, so basically there is an app for every mobile phone platform. But the easiest way is to go to our website, Voice, that's WOOYCE, voice.com. So it sounds like voice, but it's a made-up word. And when I open this website, I also have a direct link to the apps. I can go there with my smartphone, download the app, and then I can actually start. Super exciting. Thank you very much, dear Josua, for sharing this information with us, for coming to us. I look forward to more shows with you. Thank you. Dear viewers, you've seen the potential of your voice. It reflects many aspects of your current state of mind, your basic character. And it can be used impressively to treat upsets therapeutically. And more things that may lie in this upset can be dealt with. And yes, give it a try. Further information and contact details for our partners and contacts can be found on our homepage. Thank you for your interest and check back with us soon. I wish you all the best.